Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everyone who's participating in this webinar. We are privileged to have a stellar cast of speakers to speak um, on a very human topic, while many of the webinars these days, especially in the law and technology, are focused on the technology. We're pulling the curtain back on the human experience of radical change that we are seeing in the legal profession. Unlike COVID, which seem to come and go, here the changes that we are seeing seem to stay with us. And we have with us Dr. Vikram Patel from Harvard, and we have Dr. Kosa Hussain, who's a psychologist based in Melbourne. We have Rohini Singh Sisodia, who's a former legal practitioner, now a wellness practitioner based in Brussels. And we have Larissa, a practicing lawyer from Malaysia. We have had incredible response to this webinar. Privileged to have that, and I see the numbers growing beyond 263 and counting. I encourage the participants to use the Q&A box to put in your questions. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer all of them, but we will be inviting the speakers to take a pick at some of them after their formal presentations. So with that, Kosai, I'd first turn it over to you to, at a high level, explain what are the mental health trends you observe amongst your work with lawyers, and what factors do you contribute to them?
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Shreyas, and thank you everyone for having me. It's a real privilege to be here and be part of this panel. I look, my background is I'm a lawyer. I used to practice law, and then I went into psychology, and so I've now been practicing psychology for probably over the last 20 years. And I have, in the last 10 years or so, I've been working actually quite specifically with lawyers and law firms in relation to trying to get a better understanding of how do you help individuals to thrive in the workplace and to perform really well, and what are some of the mental health conditions and the impacts of that in terms of people being able to actually perform really well. So I have some slides here. I thought it'd be just easier to take you through some, quick slides, because I just wanted to set the scene in terms of, can you see the slides? Shreyas, I'll just turn to, yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
So just give you the context in terms of what the prevalence is in relation to mental health conditions within the legal profession, and also probably respond to some specific questions that people have had around why lawyers. So why is it specifically lawyers that are prone to this level of sort of mental ill health? So if you look at just the levels of psychological distress amongst the legal professions, lawyers top the list out of all professional groups in terms of research around mental health conditions. Almost 25% of lawyers will suffer from stress, and this is really chronic stress. Disproportionately high numbers have suicides. The substance abuse amongst lawyers is also double the national average in terms of America, and almost 30% of lawyers are so disillusioned they'll consider changing their career. This is a USA study. There was a study done in Australia some years ago, and we found that almost 50% of young lawyers were so disillusioned they would consider changing their profession. So what we find is that lawyers essentially, in terms of comparison, and this is a study that was done actually in Australia back in 2007, a comparison of a number of different professional groups, lawyers top the list in terms of mental health conditions relative to any other professional group. So as a group, lawyers stand out in relation to their mental health. There was also another study that was conducted in Australia, which looked at almost 7,500 legal professionals. So this considered of law students, solicitors, and barristers. And again, what we found in that particular study is that law students had the highest rates of mental ill health and psychological distress. And when we talk about psychological distress, We're talking about depression, anxiety, and stress and burnout more specifically. But law students top the list, and then followed, closely by solicitors. But what's really interesting is, if you look at the stats, is that between law students and solicitors, their levels of psychological distress are almost double that of the general population, right? So that's pretty high just within the legal profession itself. If you break it down by gender, then again, what we find is that women tend to have higher rates of psychological distress relative to men. And again, this is within the legal profession, and the surveys that were done amongst the 7,500 barristers, solicitors, and law students. And again, when you look at the age range, what we find is that, not surprisingly, when you're younger, so law students have the highest rates of psychological distress, and then the psychological distress starts to go down as you get older. And that could be a variety of other factors, life factors, etc., settling down, adjustment to work, and higher levels of expectation when you're in the initial years of practice. And so that might also be contributing to it. So what one has to kind of think about when you're looking at the levels of psychological distress amongst lawyers specifically, and this is what I've seen working with lawyers over the last 10 years, and my own experience as a lawyer, is that what you will find is that you will have sources of work stress, which will come in terms of your role, work demand, scope of the work, expectations, etc. You have coping strategies that individuals will develop in terms of their ability to manage the different stresses based on their individual capacity. But what mediates between that is really your personality style. And so one of the key things that we find in relation to how people then experience stress or chronic stress or burnout, which then leads to depression, is their personality style. And lawyers specifically have generally a type A personality style, which means that they're highly driven, high expectations. But what I often tell people is that lawyers also have a very negative, pessimistic thinking style in general. And so what tends to happen is that negative, pessimistic thinking style makes you a good lawyer, because that's what you need when you're actually practicing, right? You need to think about all the risks, the problems, and be able to kind of, identify what you do about it. But the problem with that is that it's not like a switch. So you can't switch it off and go, you know what, I'll be negative and pessimistic when I'm at work, and then I'll go home and I'll be all optimistic. It doesn't work like that. And so what happens is that you carry that type of style right across everything that you do. And because of that style, what then tends to happen is it starts to impact on performance. So if you have a generally more negative, anxious style, which most lawyers generally tend to do, it's called a trait anxious style, it then starts to impact on your performance because it contributes to stress. As your performance starts to reduce, which is what we can see here, as stress increases, performance reduces. As performance reduces, the stress goes up. So it becomes a negative cycle. And that's what then starts to contribute to burnout, and then ultimately depression, and then severe levels of anxiety, which is generally where I tend to see most people is really at poor performance or burnout levels, where they're then considering leaving the profession, leaving what they're doing, etc., and finding other things to work on. So overall, I think I'm sort of out of time, but what I wanted to kind of highlight here, and for people kind of watching, is that when we're looking at mental ill health within the legal profession, we're not only looking at what are the factors that you need to change within law firm environments, within organizational structure. Those are all things that would be contributing, but you also have to consider your individual self and the way that you operate and your personality style, and how that is contributing to ongoing mental health concerns as well. And there are very specific things you can do to address that. All right, I think that's all I have to
Thanks. You
share.
have, yeah, you have maybe a couple more minutes, Kosai, so you can maybe continue, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Vikram.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not sure if we're going to take questions. I'm happy to hand over to Vikram if he wants to take some. I know some of
Okay,
the panelists want to talk, but yeah.
perfect. Okay, then we move on. So now moving on to Professor and Dr. Vikram Patel. What are the types of mental health problems that you see impacting professionals more broadly, and lawyers especially, and what are the challenges to appropriate care?
Yeah, well, thank you, Shreyas. Just by word of a little bit of introduction to myself, I'm a psychiatrist. I currently chair the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School, and I've spent my last 3 decades of work really trying to figure out how we can use personal and community resources to address mental health problems. And so, hopefully, we will turn to some of those experiences during my remarks. But let me start by addressing the most important question. The elephant in the room is, how do we know we have a mental health problem? I think it's a really important question, and many of us struggle with this question on a day-to-day level. For example, I've had a very bad day. Does that mean that I have a mental health problem? So I wanted to just maybe lay out our current understanding of what a mental health problem is and what isn't a mental health problem, and start by acknowledging that almost every kind of mental health problem comprises of experiences that are part of every human being's lived experience on a day-to-day basis. Consider, for example, the word depression. What does it convey to us? It conveys the notion of being miserable or sad or feeling hopeless. Who hasn't felt that at some point in their lives? In fact, some of us may feel it very frequently across our lives. That doesn't mean that this is a mental illness. What it simply means is your mental health is under pressure, you are distressed. And I think it is really important to distinguish the normal human experience in reaction to what is happening in our social world, in our environments, from what is a mental illness. For me, the three main criteria that distinguish the everyday ups and downs of our emotional churn from a mental illness are these. First, how long are these experiences going on? For example, we as psychiatrists tend to say if it's been going on for at least 2 weeks in a sustained and consistent way, then that is something that might deserve attention from a clinical provider. The second is, how pervasive are these experiences? In other words, how many different aspects of your mental life are being affected? Is your hopelessness just a hopelessness which is temporary and isolated or discrete, or does it also accompany a number of other negative emotional experiences, such as feeling worthless, feeling helpless, but also a number of other experiences like having difficulties with your sleep, difficulties with your concentration, and so on. So pervasiveness is the how many different aspects of your mental or emotional life are affected. And the third is, what is the impact of these experiences on your day-to-day functioning? For example, is it creating difficulties in your interpersonal relationships with family members or with colleagues? Is it affecting your ability to concentrate on the briefs you have and therefore your effectiveness as a lawyer? I think these are the three important sets of criteria that help us distinguish the turmoils of everyday life that all of us will experience that from what might become a mental health problem. And why do we want to distinguish these two? We want to distinguish them because we don't want to medicalize the everyday ups and downs of mental health that we experience. But at the same time, we want to make sure that those who have a mental health problem are seeking appropriate care. And that brings me, to your second question, which is what are the barriers to appropriate care? Well, there are several, and let me start with the most important barrier, which is self-recognition and comfort with actually seeking care. Let's be honest, for many of us, the idea that we may be struggling with a mental health problem itself is one that is attached with a lot of shame and fear. One is constantly conscious that if we acknowledge that we have a mental health problem, it might attract a lot of negative, ideas, negative, feedback from not just our colleagues but also our clients, and so we tend to sort of hide the mental health problem. And why is that? It's because of the stigma that's been attached historically to mental health problems. Historically, mental health problems have been seen as being synonymous with madness. And madness, in turn, of course, is not a very good attribute as a lawyer or indeed in any professional space of life. And so naturally, we tend to hide our own mental health difficulties from others. And to me, this is one of the most important challenges because it's a little bit like saying, if I had a chest pain, would I hide it from people around me? No. In fact, I'll immediately take action on this. And by taking action on this, I can actually preempt perhaps a more serious cardiac issue that might arise in the future. But with mental health distress and problems, we tend to hide it, and we hide it for so long that actually the problem it festers, it becomes more persistent, it has more serious impacts on our life. And by the time we actually disclose it, we've already suffered for a long time, and we have also suffered the consequences of that mental health problem. And so the key thing I would suggest to everyone is to be conscious, sensitive to your mental health in exactly the same way that you are with signals from your body that tell you something about your physical health. And as soon as you experience some distress that goes beyond the everyday ups and downs, the first thing one has to do is to be aware of it and to communicate this to people that are close to you, family members, friends, or colleagues. I don't think there is shame at all attached to disclosing one's mental health problems. And Shreyas, I can tell you there's been a transformation in public attitudes. I mean, the very fact that Loasia is hosting a webinar on this topic and that there is such a huge response signifies something. It tells us that the kind of stigma that was attached to mental health, I think, has diminished enormously. It's not gone away, but it's certainly diminished enormously in the last few decades. The other big challenge is in seeking care is, of course, the availability of mental health services. Back in the old days, the only services that we would have considered appropriate is going to see a psychiatrist or psychologist, and there aren't many of them. Consider in a country like India, which is the most populous country in the world, the total number of specialized mental health professionals is less than 20,000. This includes everyone in a country of 1.5 billion. And most of them, of course, concentrated in some of the metropolitan cities. So clearly, access, if you consider mental health professionals as the only source of care, is a huge challenge. Two things have transformed our access. The first is the available of telemedicine platforms, which simply means that you can be anywhere in the world and you can access a mental health provider anywhere in the world using one of the very many telemedicine platforms and companies that are now available. The second important development, and this has been very central to my own work, is the fact that people without a specialized mental health degree can be trained to deliver brief psychosocial interventions, interventions that intend to get you back on your feet as quickly as possible. But the important point here is that the person supporting your recovery process does not have a very complicated medical history or psychological training, but is trained in very specific techniques, like, for example, psychological therapies based on cognitive behavioral principles. And they can actually effectively deliver these interventions. So what this has done is expand our definition of who is a mental health provider tremendously, and allows us therefore to access a much larger provider base than we historically did. So I'll pause there, Shreyas, and hand over to back to you, and hopefully we can continue some of these discussions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Vikram, very much. And I must note the vast geographic diversity in the people who have been joining and calling out all the way from Auckland and all through the Asia Pacific. And I'm again very grateful for what this shows, that the issue that lawyers are grappling with is very real. And I now turn it over. We've heard from the professionals, but let's hear from those who have experienced and also have had to learn to cope, survive, and thrive through some of these attributes we've been talking about. So, Rohini, can I first ask you to reflect on the techniques that are available to have a balanced approach uh, for enabling lawyers to have a sustainable legal career and to perhaps stay in the profession rather than consider quitting or at least reducing the incidence of burnout?
Yeah, thank you so much, Shreyas. Thank you, fellow expert panelist, and for all your insights out here. Before, going forward with the coping strategies, and I would be looking at that at an individual level and also briefly at an institutional level, I just want to talk about how the my own personal journey and how that has evolved. It was basically an adversity that reshaped my perspective and understanding on bringing work-life balance, which is not just an option for me anymore, but it also become an essential part of my well-being. And actually, it all started way back for me to just talking about my journey from being a lawyer to becoming a coach. Now, it was actually 2018 when my brother was diagnosed with a rare sarcoma of the bone, and he was 26 and he passed away within a year. And few years later, I was diagnosed with rare cancer of bile duct, cholangiocarcinoma, and this happened while I was pregnant, and unfortunately, we lost our son. And so a lot of things happen all at once. And yes, it left me quite lost, quite disconnected, quite shattered because I felt like all those dreams of thriving personally, professionally, of having a family life, all of that seemed to have, collapsed. But today, now I'm over 4 years post diagnosis and in no evidence of disease. And what started as really a fight for survival turned into a transformational healing journey for me. So I'm saying that because yes, life happens, and yes, it completely threw me off the radar for quite some time. And yes, I had to prioritize my well-being. But I'm also very deeply grateful to be here. And yes, I did not imagine life to unfold the way it did, but it also the pain carved that path forward for me. So after having practiced law for almost more than a decade, I chose to become a wellness coach because I wanted to empower others on their journey to health and healing. So I don't want to center the trauma here, but to say that adversity will find you, but adversity also reshapes you. It does not define you or limits you in any way. So because I truly feel that you do have the power and the choice to rewrite a new story for yourself. And to all those lawyers who are listening out there and who feel disconnected and overwhelmed or uncertain due to a mental health challenge or otherwise, I see that, and I feel that it's okay to feel lost, but what matters is, taking those small steps, moving towards building a more resilient self, with more acceptance, with compassion, with gratitude, with forgiveness, and addressing the root cause and really seeking help where needed. So today, I would say that I'm not just surviving, but thriving. And I live more in the present. I live fully. I live aligned with my calling. And really, at 40, I rebuilt my life from the ground up. And nothing I did, I would say, was waste. Every learning was a crucial part of my evolution here. And it's really never too late or to start anything, or anything is, I would say, unlimited by anything. Anything is possible. And our challenges, they do carry the potential for transformation. So moving on from that to, what all did I do, and also some of the coping strategies for lawyers when it comes to mental health challenges, because none of this would be possible without me taking a holistic approach to life. Because I realized very quickly that it's not just the physical, but we have to consider the whole being, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social beings that we are. And you cannot tend to talk about one without affecting the others. So at the physical level, I would say that yes, looking at timely checkups, but also looking at your diet and nutrition and supplements, maintaining a good sleep hygiene, including some form of physical activity of movement that works for you. And then the mind body practices and yoga, I feel, is such a gift to mankind, not just the philosophy, the asanas, the breath work, the pranayamas, the meditation, the Ayurvedic lifestyle, along with, what are the mindfulness, the simple tools that the modern science has given us in terms of mindfulness techniques to help manage anxiety and improve emotional regulations. And then engaging in practices of self connection, self reflection, whether that be through yoga, whether that be through meditation or qigong or journaling or being out in the nature, or creative processes like art therapy or music, etc., which can really help alleviate stress and good for the overall well-being. And pursuing hobbies and activities and hobbies that really make you happy and promote those positive emotions and help release those happy hormones that we talk about. And continuing to ask yourself those questions around what really makes you happy. There are many small rituals and grounding habits that you can do on a day-to-day basis for yourself, starting with creativity or journal or just morning walks, using mindfulness transitions and pauses between your matters, between your work calls, integrating physical movement when you have like long work days. Then a concept of, recharging yourself, which now a lot of international law firms are also promoting in their firm culture, which is if you had a very long stretch of prolonged work period, then it's good to just recharge yourself and taking some time off, having a digital detox, work detox, brief moments outdoors in nature to reset your nervous system, and really encouraging these self-care needs and being very kind to yourself and not judge yourself for prioritizing your needs, I would say. And socially, I would say that maintaining social ties and seeking support from friends, family, support groups, human connection is extremely important. And building that positive environment and relationship that can provide that kind of emotional support to you so that you don't feel isolated. And most importantly, I would say, counseling and therapeutic techniques or interventions, including and also coaching, holistic coaching, or whether, Mr. Patel talked about the whole, we have wide array of professionals, mental health professionals who are available now to really address the underlying mental and emotional issues here. And I feel that it's really, for the purpose of mental health, it's really extremely important to look at to be able to process your emotions. And that brings us, to the challenging concern that we have today as to how can we normalize seeking support, because as lawyers we often hesitate due to stigma around it from seeking support. And when I spoke to friends and colleagues who have recently experienced burnout and depression in the legal practice, many of them, they talk about how the experience was dismissed. It was looked at as a personal weakness or a failure, so that makes things particularly difficult from the side of seeking help, because they can't accept that there is an issue, so they can't help also seek help timely. And additionally, they don't really feel they were given an opportunity to come back with a fresh perspective, and that's what leads to
Thank you.
longer breaks and alternatives. So the question arises, how can we really avoid this situation and take a balanced approach that allows lawyers to continue to return to the profession and not quit the profession really solely on the grounds of well-being. And that would be very quickly what could be the balanced approach at the institutional level, I would say, is redefining the culture of overcommitment, the unrealistic timelines, deadlines, setting boundaries around that, redefining success and productivity parameters, creating awareness and education around mental health topics to be able to really address them at the wider industry level as well, encouraging in-house wellness policies, mental health programs, providing information about the symptoms, having policies for leads on ground of mental health issues, maintaining a referral resource of mental health professionals and collaborating with them, trainings to people in leadership role for effective team and work management, running mindfulness and stress management workshops, really allowing space for open dialogues and honest conversation, having peer-to-peer groups and mentoring programs and counseling opportunities, particularly for junior lawyers. And these are really all the steps that we can look at to normalize help seeking for professionals, not just as a last resort, but also as a proactive preventive measure so that someone who's experiencing symptoms can already approach and doesn't have to literally wait to collapse. And all of this contributes to creating a support system that guides and protects and does not penalize a vulnerable professional or look at them as failures. This also promotes, I would say, an attitude of real empathy and compassion with lawyers
Thank you.
experiencing mental health challenges. So I just want to very quickly end here by saying that mental health is not just a personal issue, it is a professional one. It is a collective responsibility. It has to be holistically approached. And our culture must reflect that. If we support each other with honesty, with empathy, with sustainability, the entire legal system benefits from that. And I think we can be excellent lawyers with and human beings with boundaries and well-being. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rohini, for sharing. We were to hear just now from Larissa, but looks like she has some tech difficulty. So uh, I would now maybe request go back to first to Kosai, because you'd left it tantalizingly at a point where you were saying there were some interventions and precautions possible. Having heard further in this webinar, maybe would you consider completing that sentence while I know Larissa is up, but why don't you quickly intervene, Kosai, and then we'll go back to Larissa. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I was talking to myself there for a few seconds. Thank you very much, Shreyas. Yeah, so look, I think the important thing here is when we're talking, I think Rohini's covered really significantly, and a number of points around sort of the way in which we should be looking at how what self-care is for lawyers. I think one of the things that I find amongst lawyers, which is part of their personality style, and one that we readily need to accept, is that they're highly competitive, right? And that's what we are trained as lawyers, essentially, right through law school and out of law school and in these, law firm environments to be very competitive and to achieve your best and have really perfectionistic tendencies. So part of the difficulty, and when we talk about work-life balance, I was looking at some of the questions. A common theme is everyone's asking, how do we achieve work-life balance, right? And so the difficulty we have in terms of achieving a work-life balance is because lawyers are so perfectionistic and so competitive, their entire focus is around their career. That's what they do, right? And so what I would be suggesting is that when you consider that and you consider your personality style, you need to start to think about how you create some clear boundaries around your work and your life, right? And I know it's easier said than done, but that is why you have to consider your competitive nature and your perfectionistic style. So you've got to start to think about how do you operate as an individual and what is it that drives you to achieve all of these particular types of things, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, and once you're able to do that, then you can start to set clearer boundaries around work and life.
Thank you. Larissa, delighted to welcome you back. Looks like we had a bit of a tech glitch. And the
Yes.
question I'd pose to you is, in particular, how do you see young lawyers' anxieties playing out? And do you see this being ameliorated or exacerbated by technology? And what could be some of their other concerns? We have not mentioned the word AI so far. We know it's not going anywhere. It's becoming a permanent feature of lawyers' lives. Yet, in the mental health context, it's turning out to be a tool for healing as well. So, over to you, Larissa.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shreya and Law Asia, for having me. And I apologize just now for tapping out just at my time. And interestingly, on technology. So I would say technology is a double-edged sword. It relieves and intensifies anxiety. It depends on how we implement and support it, right? So I would say the good things about technology for lawyers is, of course, legal research tools, right? Westlaw, LexisNexis. Gone were the days where we would go into dark libraries to open thick, bulky books to get something that we need. So, of course, technology has helped lawyers reduce this time-consuming task and allows us, of course, to work on higher level thinking issues or client-facing work. I would say that would be one of the good part of technology, increasing the efficiencies as lawyers. And of course, access to knowledge, right? AI-driven databases, chatbots has helped us lawyers get answers very quickly. I don't know how many of us are guilty of going to ChatGPT and asking for a summary of a certain thing as a first instant of help when clarifying a certain area of law. So that has definitely helped younger lawyers without needing to ask senior lawyers specifically on certain areas of law. And of course, the various learning platforms that allow continual upskilling, meaning we can always upskill very, very quickly from any courses around the world. Access to knowledge has become so easy. And I think most young lawyers, or maybe the older lawyers, won't appreciate this as much. I would say senior lawyers, the benefit of remote and flexible work. I think technology has really helped in terms of virtual hearing, cloud-based systems, collaboration tools, providing flexibility that reduces stress and support work-life balance. For example, if a lawyer has a family and they needed to be home at that particular time, they are able to take on hearings from the comfort of their home. And I think that has really helped a lot of individuals in terms of a work-life balance. However, at the same time, as I mentioned, a double-edged sword, how has technology made it worse in terms of being a young lawyer? So I think there is a fear of job security to be replaced by AI. We all know there are various mechanisms now that allow document review, contract drafting, legal research, basically in transactional or document heavy roles where lawyers might not be needed at that part of due diligence, for example. So there is some form of fear there. Or I would say another one would be skill undesirability. The rapid changes, making it a fear or anxiety for us falling behind or not mastering tools or platforms quick enough because everything is needed yesterday, right? We are always working on a quick pace. Everyone wants everything quickly. So are we able to compete with that? Which ties in with increased expectations. You are needed 24/7, WhatsApp groups of different cases, clients asking you at any time of the day, what is the update of a case? Because technology has enabled that access to a lawyer being so quick, getting an answer almost immediately. So we are asked to produce more in less time, even with the help of technology, but also as humans, right? And loss of mentorship opportunities. So as I mentioned just now, with AI, maybe our communication or physical conduct with a senior lawyer would be less because everything can be done remotely or quicker. So we don't really have that informal learning from senior lawyers who would sit down, explain to us one by one, and that human touch could be lost with technology. Now, just touching on other major concerns for young lawyers would be, for example, billable hours. I think that still remains intense, whether with technology or not. Technology, of course, helps to improve this productivity, but it also still hangs over our head that bills needs to be met. Unclear career paths. I think with the years, the passing years, we have seen that there are many options of being a lawyer, whether you're an independent contractor, an equity partner, whether you are on your own, whether you are attached to an NGO. So there are so many various opportunities that sometimes can feel very overwhelming if there is no straight level by level guidance as being a lawyer. I think this is a big one for younger lawyers as well. The values alignment. I think the generations that are coming up are very woke, are very into meaningful and purposeful work related jobs. Their calling being vocational. So that has somewhat affected anxiety or the way they view their work. Is there meaning in it? I think that has been a concern. Of course, with debt, student debt, that's always there. And thinking if they want to do work that contributes to human rights, how do they pursue that with not thinking about their value in terms of monetary? How can they do both? These kind of issues of aligning their values. And identity crisis, as I mentioned just now, purpose is very important and calling is very important in this generation, that what they do needs to have meaning. So just to answer that would be, yeah, double-edged sword. It makes practice more efficient and accessible, but it also, of course, intensifies the pressure than what it was. Now, the key, I believe, is institutions that support them to balance the innovation with mentorship and humane workload expectation, and of course, strategic career guidance. Technology is, of course, not the problem or the solution. It's a tool. I believe that lawyers can thrive when firms use these tools to enhance training, clarify purpose, protect well-being, and innovation should not come at the cost of human development. Now, just to add, I think I have a few minutes left. I'd just like to share on one question that was asked. I think it related a lot on empathy and compassion. So as someone who has worked extensively on human rights cases, I'll be honest, I didn't start out knowing how to separate my emotions from work. Early on, I did find myself deeply attached to the outcomes of the cases and emotionally invested in the clients, whether if it's abduction cases, family abuse, statelessness, these kind of issues are very real. The emotion weight of advocating for justice, especially when lives are at stake, can of course be both grounding and overwhelming at the same time. Compassion in its context, there were moments where I thought, is it a weakness? Is it a strength? But it again might be a double-edged sword. It of course drives commitment, it fuels the perseverance, keeps the work humane. Yet, if it goes unchecked, I think just hearing from all the past panelists that they were speaking, it can also lead to burnout, blurred boundaries, secondary trauma, or even a sense of personal failure when things don't go as hoped. So personally, gradually, I found a rhythm. That rhythm didn't come from detaching myself from the cases, but I think it came from learning how to stay present without drowning in it. The key often lies in transforming compassion into measured empathy. So what does that mean, right? It's being present with the pain of others without being consumed by it. Means showing up fully for the people you serve, your clients, but also recognizing that your role is to advocate and, of course, not to absorb. And of course, that takes time, practice, support from the people around you. And over time, you
Thank you.
actually learn how to channel compassion into resilience rather than exhaustion. So I would say, like, don't be afraid to feeling deeply with the cases that you have. What makes us humane, but develop your rhythm, surround yourself with support, seek mentorship, protect your mental health. And I believe compassion is most powerful when it's sustainable. And being aware of your triggers and how you are, as mentioned by Dr. Vikram just now, knowing uh, how it impacts you, is it consistent and whatnot, and seeking help when it affects you. I think that would help you be a better lawyer, because being a lawyer is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I think I'll just end with that and pass it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing deeply and vulnerably, both Rohini and Larissa. I wanted to, before turning over to Dr. Vikram, just share that I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Shreyas Jayasimha, a lawyer practicing out of Bangalore. I had, amongst other things, the UNCITRAL and the UN committee at Law Asia. And a quick word about Law Asia. You know, this is an organization that has both commercial topics for the law and non-commercial topics under one tent. And that kind of makes it stand apart from the vast number of lawyers organizations that we have. Also, I want to say thank you to Lawasia for making this a free webinar. I'm sure that has gone a long way in making sure it is accessible to people and who may want to revisit some of these topics, which even after the live procedures is done. But with that note of thanks and the belated introduction, I'm back in the zone with a question to Dr. Patel. Um, is you know, you mentioned the technological tools that are available. I'd request you to speak a little more about that with specificity if possible. And also, amongst the written questions have been some very urgent questions on how do you recognize a panic attack, either in yourself or in someone else next to you? And what are the kind of immediate first aid that you spoke about? Is there some hint that you can give us or list of resources that people can consult? Vikram.
Yeah, thank you, Shreyas. It's been fantastic listening to the other panelists, and I you really wanted to take off from where Rohini had described the very many ways in which one can care for oneself. And I just want to amplify that those are actually daily practices. Those are not practices which one does when one is under stress. These are almost like the kind of mental health equivalent of vaccination. The more you practice those different skills that she described, the more resilience you build internally to deal with the stuff that we have to deal with in everyday life. And I wanted to really emphasize the word work-life balance that came up repeatedly in all the other panelists' description. And by the way, I come from the medical profession. We have exactly the same kinds of conversations in our own professional community about the struggle between trying to achieve excellence in our professional goals and how that oftentimes seems to conflict with our struggle to be a good parent, a good spouse, a good friend, a good child, in all the different relationships that are so central also to our sense of self. And I think that is a struggle that it spans many different disciplines. Lawyers are by no means, an outlier here. And I think the key point I want to make here is intentionality. It doesn't happen by magic. It doesn't just suddenly happen one day you wake up and say, oh, now I found my work-life balance. It requires intentionality to actually create the circumstances of work-life balance. And at the very crudest level, that means how many hours a day in your waking life are you actually committing to work versus things outside work? I mean, that's the simplest way in which way one can actually define work-life balance. And of course, there are more details about both how you manage your work, the workplace cultures that some people in the chat have described as toxic, and so on, as well as what you do, in the time outside work. Let me just turn to your specific questions about technology. Just to be brief, first of all, to say technology is being accessed primarily through self-help tools that are being made available, in some instances completely gratis, pro bono. One just needs to search online. You will come across many certified bots, for example, chat bots, which have been designed in a way to literally mimic what might be the kind of interaction you might have with a trained therapist. And then there are also self-help apps that also guide you through techniques that a therapist may use in order to actually help yourself understand how you can manage your mental health. And then the third way technology helps is, of course, through just simply the telemedicine platforms, which is pretty much like what we're doing right now, seeing a therapist rather than in their office. You're seeing them online. And there is a real advantage of technology here because it addresses some of the stigma of having to walk up to a clinic which announces itself as a mental health clinic. But also there's just practical issues of the amount of time it takes to go to a clinic and waiting time, etc., etc. So I think in many ways technology is enhancing access to care. It's not replacing the human therapist in any way. It's enhancing the options that people have for care. And let me turn to the second question about panic attacks. Panic attacks are terrifying human experiences. I don't know if they're very common. I've had a panic attack. Again, they're part and parcel of the normal range of human reactions to circumstances. So, for example, My panic attack came when I was in a concert where there was a very, very dense crowd. And that's typically the kind of situation when you start feeling panicky, and for natural reasons, because you're afraid, being in that very intense, crowded situation for your own personal safety. And that then escalates very quickly into a panic attack, mainly because when you're anxious, you tend to hyperventilate. You breathe much quicker in a shallow way, and that creates physiological changes in your body, which in turn triggers a set of neurological responses that lead to rapid heart rate, the sense of palpitations. Your heart is sort of, pounding in your chest, feeling breathless, sweating a lot, and of course, feeling terrified that something awful is about to happen. Very often, panic attacks actually get misdiagnosed as a cardiac event. And if you ask any emergency room, when someone under the age of 40 appears with acute chest pain and what looks like a heart attack, and they think they're having a heart attack, typically 99% of the time, that is actually an acute panic attack and not, in fact, a cardiac event. Now, how do you manage a panic attack? The first thing is, of course, to take control of your breathing. This is the most important thing because, as I mentioned earlier, it's rapid breathing that is actually creating the physiological changes that in turn trigger the panic attack. And so taking control of your breathing and practicing the same breathing techniques that many of us are familiar with if we are practicing meditation or yoga will basically be the same. Taking control of your breathing so that you're breathing intentionally, slowing down your breathing, and also using any kind of relaxing kind of internal messaging. Again, those of us who do yoga we have our own mantras that we often incorporate in that. If you're not able to do that, then the other thing is breathing into a paper bag. Seriously, that does work. Again, why? Because the kind of physiological changes of gases that happen when you hyperventilate are just automatically corrected when you breathe into a paper bag. But that's a little bit awkward and it can't be done in a public situation that easily. So really practicing breathing is a very useful technique. And I'll end by saying, others in the panel have described the value of meditation. For me, meditation is secular, and it really comprises a range of different philosophies and traditions. But if you look at all the different kinds of meditation, the one thing that they share in common is a focus on the internal stimuli, and especially one's breathing patterns. And so learning those breathing techniques, I believe, are very useful in our day-to-day life, but also can be deployed when one is actually feeling under stress or anxious.
Thank you for the very helpful tips that you've shared with the audience here. Back to you, because I wanted to give you the floor to ask you to reflect on some of the more common issues that you see your clients who are lawyers come to you with, and if you think there are techniques in addition to the ones that you have been shared so far that are immediate, practical, um, and can be understood easily and adopted by the audience, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ashish. Yeah, in fact, I was actually going through some of the questions. One of the questions that struck me was, why does my mind race, especially at night? And I thought that was a really interesting question, but it's not an uncommon one. I find that with a lot of the patients that I work with, lawyers that I see, one of the common issues is that they talk about the difficulty sleeping at night, and that when they try to go to sleep, their mind is constantly racing, thinking about everything that they need to be doing the next day, or what they have done that day, and whether they've done it right or correctly, incorrectly, etc. And then they're constantly thinking about that. So when you think about your mind, and the way that I sort of like to kind of divide the idea behind the mind is that you have two parts to your mind. One is what we call a doing state, and the other is a being state, right? And the doing state of your mind is that part of the mind which is constantly thinking about things, what it needs to do next, why it needs to do it. It's evaluating, judging, thinking about different things. And the being state of the mind is that state of the mind in which you are at rest. So think of it as the doing mind as the mind that thinks about achieving different things, and the being state of the mind as the state which is experiencing whatever is going on in the moment. right? And so what you really try to do when you're kind of in this state at night is try to divide out the doing versus the being state of the mind, right? And so what you're really trying to kind of work through is setting aside all the thoughts that you've got about all the things that you need to be doing and achieving, and coming back to just allowing your mind to be in a state of rest. And a lot of the panelists have talked about the idea of meditation. I would also espouse mindfulness, which is another sort of component of meditation. I draw a distinction between mindfulness and meditation in that with meditation, I believe a lot of the components of meditation cognitively are around focus and attention, whereas mindfulness is really the practice of what we call non-judgmental awareness. So you're trying to be aware of what is actually going on in your life, in your thoughts, and not judging them, and not attaching to the thoughts, which is what we do a lot of the time. So what I would suggest is at night, one of the easiest things to do is to, first of all, at a very practical level, I tell people is you switch your phone off. Don't keep your phone around with you. That's a simple thing. Turn the clock away so you don't sort of look at it when you wake up in the middle of the night. And before you go to sleep, I always advocate reading a little bit, a hard copy, not a Kindle or an iPad, because we find that helps to alleviate concentration, attention, and bring the mind back to a state of rest. And then what I would suggest is trying to be mindful. So just lying in bed, thinking about your day, but not attaching to the thoughts. So not thinking about what needs to be done and how you need to be doing it, allowing the thoughts to come, letting them pass, just like on a cloud, and seeing thoughts coming and going through your mind, and just allowing them to go without attaching to the thoughts. That would be
Oh,
my
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I note that you had consults just before, and you will have one just after this webinar as well. So we want to stick to time. And Rohini, turning to you, we've heard a wealth of knowledge. You also shared some, but in terms of the number of questions that have been shared with the panelists prior to this webinar, did any other question call out to you? Um, and is there something that you'd like to add to all that's been said?
Thank you, Shreya. So I looked at all the questions from the perspective of, the junior lawyers, what can they do? And the senior, mostly the junior lawyers had a lot of questions around what can they do on a day-to-day basis. So as Dr. Patel rightly put it, in my coping strategies, I did put in what at individual level, what could be the preventive daily routines, actions that you can take. And also when it goes to a situation where you are facing mental health challenges, then seeking support on that front. What are the changes at the institutional level? But one thing particularly, because a lot of people are talking about the law firm culture, and I want to say that, what I just feel that as you evolve in the profession, the nature of struggle changes. So at the junior level, you do feel, you cannot say no to work. There's a fear of replacement constantly. You feel like if you say no, the opportunity would go away, and you wouldn't be considered in the same light again and given that opportunity again. And then senior levels, there is of course the pressure from the top. There are billing and recovery targets, and that makes often the that passes the pressure downwards without you even knowing that. So when as a senior, I won't honestly, I was just passing on a culture down to my team members, which I didn't even realize. It's just like a vicious circle that there is, and everybody feels kind of squeezed at their level as well. So I just feel that how can we be able to manage that? And I feel really an open, again, I talked about boundaries and I talked about setting realistic timelines, which is extremely important now because of what Larissa rightly said. The younger crowd is quite mindful of the work-life balance and is raising and talking about those things, and rightly so. So looking at that as well, and then having really an honest and open conversation between seniors and juniors to kind of understanding how can the work allocation and timelines and all of that can be reasonably managed. Because yes, if you look at it, the legal profession is demanding and the time is of essence, and there will be situations where you will be stretched beyond your comfort zone, and that cannot be prevented, I understand. So how can we still overall approach that in a balanced way? So there are days that where you're stretched, then there are days where you get time to recharge and coming back to the profession in that way, rather than saying that we are 24/7 available, which most lawyers would proudly say, talk about. We're always available. We work the weekends. We don't sleep most days. Instead of that, maybe we can start creating more realistic timelines and boundaries around that, even with the clients and also with the team. So that would, I think, address some of the
Thank you.
questions around that. Thank you.
Thank you. Larissa, do you, you spoke a bit about what bar councils and bar associations can do and professional services bodies. Maybe we can add to that list chambers of commerce. We've had a comment and a question about even legislative interventions. If you have work safety rules for other professions, why don't we have work safety rules for lawyers? And you heard earlier in our practice call about COSAI's explaining about how in Australia some state bar associations have set up counseling helplines. So, what are your reflections on how these institutional interventions can work, and any other final comments from your side?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So I can speak from the Malaysian bar side. So I think the bar plays a very big role in this. But with the bar providing these services, there is still a gap of people coming forward and using the services because of the stigma. And we have seen the data. So on a personal capacity, I head the Human Rights Committee within the Malaysian bar. So early this year, we did a collaboration with Wellbeing Work Movement. It's basically Malaysia's first comprehensive workplace well-being assessment tool for the legal profession to collect data and make a report on mental health with the legal profession. So basically, they would take 3 tests, psychosocial risk, well-being levels, and psychological safety, and then a report will come out together with resources and a guidebook on how do you deal with it. Now, the response that we have to this survey has been very, very low. And we are trying to push people to answer this survey. But at the same time, I'm thinking probably lawyers are so busy in their work that they can't even have time to pause to actually do this so that we can collect the data and make change. So I think we have to be intentional. I love the word intentional, and I think it's been used here today a lot, to be aware, to pause and stop and see what's around that's available. With the Malaysian Bar as well, we also have a memorandum of understanding with the Boards of Councillors Malaysia. So what happens here is the bar actually funds 5 free counseling sessions per individual, per lawyer, and all identities and records remains confidential between the client and counsellor with no disclosure to the Bar Council. So there are available sessions, but again, not many people are tapping into it. I'm not sure, is it because of the stigma or not being aware, or we are in a position to think, yeah, lawyers should be stressed, lawyers should work on weekends, lawyers should be available 24/7, because I have had people who work under me and come with that kind of mentality, and when I tell them I don't want to disturb you after working hours, they are like, why? Isn't that normal, So we have normalized overwork. And that's why the younger ones are thinking it should be like that until someone says or breaks that cycle. We have ad hoc peer support groups, pandemic response we had at that time. And I think on legislative issues, what the Malaysian Bar did, we actually recognized workplace bullying as a form of professional misconduct under our Legal Profession Act, because we saw that contributed to a lot of mental health issues as well. So that was something that we did 2 years ago. And of course, webinars. So there are opportunities there within the bar. And if you have authority or you are someone who can make change within the bar, I think you should step into it and speak out on it, because there are a lot of people struggling, but I think they fear to be seen and heard until they feel there is a safe space. So I think this is a great initiative that we have done, and hopefully more to come. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. And Kosai, I know that you've unmuted yourself. So before I turn it over to the final word from every one of the panelists, I thought I'll just quickly answer the one question that's posed to me on the Q&A. As far as I'm concerned, I have my own practices, and when I feel that I'm veering off, then I firstly ensure that I'm aware of it, and then if and before I need to reach out to external resources, I do much of all the physical and spiritual practices that have been discussed here so far. But I think it's also important for people in the bar to be able to speak about such topics openly and freely, and giving confidence to other members to say, why wouldn't you mention that you had a tennis elbow, let's say, and you dealt with it and moved on, and so this is, I think, an important way of dealing with it. And so far as the practice itself is concerned, we at Arna Law, we say that we want to unleash fearless abundance, whether it's in the team members, whether it's in the clients or the situations that we're dealing with, and and to attract people who want to do the right thing through the right means, practicing excellence and practicing compassion. And I think this approach has helped us at least stay centered. And then we have our periodic team gatherings as well. But I'm sure there are many other people doing far better things, and I'm very humbly sharing and trying to learn as well. With that out of the way, I will now turn to final comments so that we stick to time, and we will begin with Kusai. Then we'll go to Vikram and Larissa and Rohini. You'll have the last word.
Well, yeah, thanks again, Shreyas. And again, look, in terms of just very quickly, my final comments would really be around helping, people and understanding for lawyers to a large extent that they need to be open about their mental health conditions, and they need to be aware of what is actually going on. So I think educate yourself as much as possible, make yourself available to the different resources that are there. And I think Law Asia is doing a really fantastic job now bringing this to awareness to people, and really is trying to destigmatize this idea of mental health and what the impacts it has on the legal profession. Because one of the things that I will say, and from all the experience that I've had, that lawyers are very, very smart people, highly intelligent, very, very driven, competitive, right? And so cognitively they have a lot to contribute and provide. And so when these mental health conditions start to impact, it really starts to impact on productivity. So you have to think of your mind as the main tool that you have. And so you've got to keep it safe. You've got to do whatever you can to make sure that it is always functioning at peak performance. And if that means that you have to take care of your mental health and prioritize your self-care, then that is what you should be doing.
Thank you, Vikram.
Yeah, I want to just follow exactly on from Kusai by just reminding everyone how the World Health Organization defines mental health. And I'll quote, mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life. The word normal is important here, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to their community. What can be a more important personal asset than one's mental health? Thank you.
Thank you, Vikram. Larissa?
Right. Yeah. So I'll just echo what everyone has said. And I think it's important to know that it's okay to not be okay. I think you need to find a safe space and you really need to be surrounded with people who know you in and out so that when they see a change in behavior over you, they are able to journey alongside you because sometimes it's so hard to say that you're not okay. And sometimes the people closest to you can call it out and journey with you. So have your tribe with you. I think that's important. And be honest always. I think as lawyers, the work that we do is not easy, but here we are and we just make room to be better. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Rohini.
Thank you, Shreya. Since I'm the last one, let me say that, the awareness is extremely important. And what we are doing today, talking about it, and what Loasia has brought up this very important conversation, because it always starts with a dialogue, with an open and honest conversation. And I think we kind of addressed that today, which is extremely relevant. Somebody talked about how can we now come together and make changes at the institutional level. And I also spoke about that earlier as to how can we create this support system so that the professionals who are undergoing mental health challenges, they're given that pause that they need, but also a system which allows them to come back with that fresh perspective. So really creating that compassion and empathetic system around that. Thank you.
Well, with that, I exhort the multiple participants to please join Law Asia. It takes more than a village to make good things happen. So please do collaborate. And a final thank you to our very distinguished panelists. And then signing off with peace, shalom, salam, and Om Shanti. All the best.